Well, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining from. We're going to get started in just a moment. We're still letting participants in from the waiting room, so bear with us for a few seconds. While you wait, please feel free to get accustomed with the setting here. See if you can actually find the question and answer function. Find the button where you can submit questions. Great, it looks like everybody's in. Fantastic. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the launch of the ICAP ETS Status Report 2026. So this is our Asia Pacific and Europe session, and looking out who's joined. Yeah, we have participants from across the region and beyond. So yeah, thank you very much for making time, whether that means an early morning start or late afternoon. My name is Alexander Eden. I'm from the ICAP team. It's a pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. First, a bit of housekeeping. So this webinar is going to be recorded. It's being recorded now. The recording will be made available on the ICAP website. Please use the question and answer function. It's Q&A to submit your questions throughout the webinar. We will address them during the dedicated Q&A session at the end. Unfortunately, simultaneous interpretation is not available. We will be speaking in English throughout, but if anything's unclear, please just write into the Q&A. Thanks. So before I walk through the agenda, a few words about today. So yeah, we're proud to be launching the ICAP status report once again. So this is our flagship publication in the ETS and carbon pricing space. It represents a significant piece of work for the ICAP community. Yeah, each edition is more comprehensive than the last, and this year's is no exception. I also want to take a moment just to acknowledge the people who made this report possible. So the ICAP team worked really hard over the past 6 months or more, actually, to deliver this publication. And also, it would not exist without the support of our members, observers, our partner governments, and collaborating institutions. Thank you. This really is it's a collective effort, and I believe it shows in the quality of the product that we're launching today. So before we begin, a quick note on the report itself. So the ICAP ETS Status Report 2026 is now live on the ICAP website. If you've not already downloaded it, please do so after today's session, or you can also find a link in the chat. We're going to post a link to download the report in the chat. Right, so let me say a few things about ICAP, so the International Carbon Action Partnership. ICAP is an international forum, actually an intergovernmental forum of 45 national and subnational governments. We bring together policymakers and regulators who are actively implementing or developing emissions trading systems. So our 3 core activities, these are sharing best practices, facilitating peer learning across jurisdictions, supporting the development and improvement of carbon markets, and also exploring the role of emissions trading in broader decarbonisation strategies. For many of the jurisdictions that are represented today, whether you're operating an established system or designing one or exploring whether ETS is the right instrument, ICAP, we are the community of practice that brings those experiences together. So the status report that we're presenting today is one of our flagship contributions to our core mission. So let's take a look at the agenda for today. So I'm going to start by presenting the key highlights and trends from the ICAP status report. I'll be covering the main findings, and I also do a tour of global ETS developments. My colleague Victor will then walk us through a selection of the report's infographics. We will then move to our panel discussion before we close with a Q&A session. So yeah, please do submit your questions throughout via the Q&A function. We do want to hear from you. Before we get started, I'd like to briefly introduce who will be on our panel today. We're very fortunate today to be joined by a distinguished group of practitioners and policymakers. So each are representing a jurisdiction that features prominently in this year's status report. and yeah, each bringing a direct experience of designing, implementing, and engaging with emissions trading systems. So I'll briefly introduce them. Dirk Weinreich will be joining us shortly. He's the ICAP co-chair. He will also be representing the Federal Ministry for the Environment of Germany. Dirk will open our panel with a few remarks in his capacity as ICAP co-chair. Yeah, before sharing Germany's perspective on ETS developments. Subham Srivastava, he's our ICAP Humboldt Research Fellow from India. He's bringing research and policy perspective on India's carbon credit trading scheme. This is one of the most significant new systems launched in 2026. Dr. Han Wenya works at the Policy Research Center for Environment and Economy in China. This is one of the leading research institutions shaping China's carbon market policy at the moment. Han Dang represents the Vietnam National Energy Efficiency Center, brings direct insight into Vietnam's pilot ETS. And we will also be joined a little bit later by Ruben Vermeeren from DG Klima at the European Commission. This is the directorate responsible for the EU ETS, also the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism, and more generally EU climate policy. So yeah, we're very much looking forward to hearing from all 5 of our panelists after the presentation. But yeah, first of all, we're going to just dive into the report. And get some impressions from the report. So, so the ICAP status report, it's our flagship annual publication. This year marks actually the 13th edition of what has become the most comprehensive global overview of compliance emissions trading that's out there. So what this edition contains, there's 57 ETS fact sheets. So we're tracking every system currently in force, under development, or officially under consideration worldwide. It includes also a trends and outlook editorial chapter setting out the major themes that are shaping global ETS landscape this year. There are 12 infographics in the report, of which we will see a selection shortly. These are data visualizations. They cover everything from emissions coverage, sectoral scope, revenue use, offset use, and more. To note, there is also a very nice year in review section that covers the key updates from every jurisdiction around the world as well. So please do download the full report. It's available on the ICAP website as well as an executive summary. For those of you that are working within the ETS and carbon market realm, the fact sheets really are the detailed part of the report. Please do feel free to access them and use them for your work. So let's take a look at some of the key trends and outlooks. Our privilege at ICAP having this broad overview of all of these different systems, we're able to draw some of the key trends from our perspective. There are 4 key trends that anchor this year's status report. Yeah, these are sort of the analytic part of the publication. Each is further developed in detail in the trends and outlook chapter. And also it's supported by infographics that Victor's going to walk us through in a moment. So first of all, one of the key trends that we see, ETS growth is proving resilient in what is a very turbulent political landscape over the last year. So this first message, it's about resilience, actually, and it's perhaps one of the most important one to lead with. We're living through a period of genuine political turbulence, trade tensions, affordability pressures. Some countries, there's a visible retreat from climate ambition. And yet, the momentum behind emissions trading has not slowed. Actually, quite the opposite. There are now 41 systems in force worldwide, covering now more than a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. The jurisdictions operating these systems represent nearly 2/3 of global GDP and more than half of the world's population. So this year, 3 new national systems in Japan, India, and Vietnam are coming online. Each of these reflect a distinct domestic context, and each represents a political commitment actually to carbon pricing that has become an essential instrument of their climate policy. If we look a little bit closer, so we even see that carbon markets are now sitting at the center of many of the NDC strategies across major economies, particularly in the G20. So what this means, emissions trading is no longer a niche policy tool. It really is becoming part of the architecture of the global climate response. So our next key point, so this looks at the next generation of ETS designs that are taking shape. They're bringing innovation and integration. So the second trend is about design diversity. So we're not seeing the world converge on a single ETS template. Rather, new systems are designed as tailored instruments that reflect domestic development pathways. So India and Vietnam are prime examples. Both have launched intensity-based systems, but excuse me, with transition pathways built in towards more stringent approaches over time. So this is a pragmatic and politically sustainable approach. It's one that ICAP has actively supported. We are also seeing, at the same time, deeper integration of ETS into broader policy frameworks, combining emissions trading with carbon taxes, offset crediting, border adjustment mechanisms. So carbon credits in particular growing in strategic importance, and early linkages to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement are also beginning to take shape. Our third point, we're looking at established systems. There's a shift from incremental reforms to structural transformation here. So in these more mature markets, the story is no longer one of fine-tuning, it's one of structural change. So one example, China's announcement of a roadmap to transition from intensity-based cap to absolute cap. This is a significant development in this regard. In this way, the world's largest carbon market is explicitly setting itself on a path towards greater ambition. Alongside that, China has also further signaled expansion of coverage to more sectors. This is a trend we see with established systems are widening into more complex systems, into more complex sectors more generally, such as buildings, transport, waste, maritime. Also, removals are beginning to feature more prominently as part of the net zero planning. So one example, the EU CBAM has entered its compliance phase. California has legislated its program right out to 2045. So the direction of travel is clear. So tighter caps, broader sectoral coverage, deeper alignment with long-term net zero pathways. Finally, our fourth point is the outlook currently, how things stand and looking forward. Three things here, important: managing competitiveness, political and public acceptance, and what we call coherence. So looking ahead, these three challenges really stand out. Firstly, like approaches to carbon leakage and competitiveness protection, they continue to evolve. There's growing interest actually in carbon border adjustment mechanism style tools that goes now well beyond the EU. So second, public and political acceptance really remains critical. Particularly transparent, visible revenue use is increasingly recognized as central to maintaining this acceptance as well. You'll see 2025 marked a new record for ETS revenues, nearly 80 US billion in a single year. And since 2007, total systems worldwide have collectively raised over 454 billion US dollars. But now really how those revenues are spent, it's no longer an afterthought. So it really is a prerequisite for political sustainability. One example we see here, California and Washington, they've deliberately now rebranded from cap and trade to cap and invest to make this message really explicit. Another example, in the EU, the ETS2 covering that will cover buildings and road transport. This development just would not be politically feasible without the accompanying social climate fund. So the third point here regarding coherence, this is perhaps most important for this audience as well. Stronger international alignment will become more essential, particularly as Asia Pacific region. The share of global ETS coverage is growing. It's already very large and it's growing. the policy choices that are being made in this region at the moment, they will increasingly define how coherent the global carbon market is, or how fragmented it is. So this is also one really important key message here. I'm now going to take a look. These are some of our headline numbers from the report. So yeah, at a snapshot, 41 systems now in force, approximately 20%, 6% of global greenhouse gas emissions covered. Yes, so 63% of global GDP, and half the world's population now live in jurisdictions with an ETS. 14 of G20 of the G20 nations now have an ETS in place, and more will follow. Yeah, ETS revenues have now reached a new record, as I mentioned. One number which is not on the screen, but is worth highlighting, is that 80%, so 4/5 of all the emissions currently covered by an ETS globally, are in the Asia Pacific region. So this is really a powerful illustration of just how central the Asia Pacific region now is to the global carbon market story. Great. So I'm going to take you on a little tour of the major developments in emissions trading around the world over the past year. I'm going to move through each region, but given today's audience, I'm going to focus specifically on a bit more detail of the Asia Pacific region. I will, however, start in Europe. So the EU ETS still remains the world's largest carbon market by trading value and volume. The last year brought several landmark milestones. So shipping companies face their first deadline for surrendering allowances in 2024. The EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism entered its definitive compliance phase in January of this year. Yeah, also, free allowances for aviation were fully phased out as of 2026. Coming up, the ETS2 for building and road transport, this has been postponed by 1 year. This reflects some of the political sensitivity that is extending to carbon pricing, particularly those that are extending carbon pricing to households. On the international side, the EU Council granted the European Commission a mandate to open formal linking talks with the UK. These are now underway. And the UK ET itself is also expanding scope, maritime coverage, waste incineration from 2028, and engineered greenhouse gas removals from 2029. Also, one key jurisdiction to note, just on the doorstep of Europe, Turkey is really on the cusp of launching its pilot ETS, following the enactment of its landmark climate law in 2025. This will follow shortly this year, I'm sure. Let's make a quick trip across to North America. So, as I mentioned, California's landmark legislation reauthorizes its cap and trade program through to 2045 and renames it as Cap and Invest. This is a deliberate rebranding. It makes the link between carbon revenues and clean investment really explicit. On the East Coast, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, they completed their third program review. Pennsylvania, unfortunately, formally ended its participation, but the state of Virginia now is set to rejoin. So dynamic and positive developments there. I will take a quick look at Latin America now as well. So Latin America is becoming one of the most dynamic regions for ETS development. There are many systems, or multiple systems there, moving from legislation through towards implementation in parallel. So Brazil has been building the institutional infrastructure for its ETS, established in law. This was in 2024. Chile has published a national roadmap on carbon pricing and market instruments. Also, Colombia's regulatory framework is progressing towards a preliminary phase in 2027. And Mexico also published its updated sectoral program alongside an NDC3 that's pledging net zero by mid-century. So the momentum in Latin America is real. It's one of the regions to watch most closely in the years ahead. I'm now going to step back to Asia Pacific. So this is where I want to spend a little bit more time. This is where the most significant developments of the year are concentrated. I'll just start with China. So China's national ETS formally expanded last year, adding approximately 3 billion tons of emissions to the system. So building on this, China's highest authorities have issued guidelines in August of last year. This sets out a roadmap to further expand the system's scope. It also signals a transition from intensity-based to absolute cap, and a shift from free allocation towards a hybrid model incorporating auctioning. So this is a fundamental step change in the ambition and architecture of the world's largest carbon market. Also, three new national systems came online in 2026. So each reflects a distinct approach to carbon pricing. So Japan's GX ETS transitioned from voluntary to mandatory, with over 700 companies now under binding obligations. India's carbon credit trading scheme, or CCTS, activated binding emissions intensity targets for 7 industrial sectors. And Vietnam's pilot ETS also entered into force now, with compliance obligations in the power, iron and steel, and cement sectors. This makes Vietnam one of the newest members of the global ETS community. Each of these systems will be good to watch over the coming few years to see how these initial steps lead then to further development. So beyond these new launches, also Indonesia expanded its ETS significantly. So they've more than tripled the number of covered installations to over 400. Also, the Republic of Korea entered its 4th allocation period with more ambition, including a reformed auctioning framework. Also, further down south, Australia's safeguard mechanism completed its first full compliance year, with covered emissions decreasing by approximately 2% already. So across this whole region, the picture is one of expansion, increasing ambition, and genuine policy innovation as well. Thanks. I'm going to leave this journey here. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Victor, who's going to walk us through a selection of the infographics that we have in the report.
Thank you very much, Alex. As Alex was mentioning, we're now going to present some of the infographics that you can find in this edition of the status report. What we see, the infographic that we see right now, is the historical expansion of the emissions that are covered by an emissions trading system. Also in 2026, the emissions coverage continues to increase. And as Alex was mentioning, we have already reached around 26% of global emissions. Also, as Alex mentioned, since the publication of last year's status report, we have welcomed 3 new systems: the India CCTS, the Vietnam ETS, and the Japan GX ETS. It's interesting to mention that the Vietnam ETS includes compliance obligations for 2025, which are presented here as a striped bar in that same year. We can also see another interesting point, that a large proportion of global emissions covered by ETSs are in the Asia-Pacific region, and that is 4/5 of the total. And this is due to, in no small part, the coverage of the China national ETS, which accounts for around 8 gigatons of CO2 equivalent emissions. In the next slide, we are now seeing that ETSs have been a key policy tool for climate change mitigation in large economies. What this infographic is showing us is essentially 2 things. The first one is it is showing the amount of emissions that are covered by an ETS, that is in dark blue, the section at the bottom. And that is both as a proportion of global emissions to the left, and as a proportion or as a share of G20 total emissions to the right. The second thing that we can see here is in the two lightmost shades of blue, so the ones that are in between the large sections, and that is an estimate of the emissions that are or that could be covered by ETSs that are currently under consideration or under development. One interesting thing to note here is that whereas the vast majority of emissions currently covered by an ETS come from a jurisdiction in the G20, most of the jurisdictions that may be covered or that could be covered if all of the ETSs under consideration or under development materialize come from outside the G20. We would also like to note that an explanation on the assumptions used to estimate the coverage of ETSs currently under development or under consideration can be found in the notes on methods and sources, of the status report at the end of the status report. In the next slide, we will see one very interesting infographic, which is of sectoral coverage. Emission trading systems cover a wide variety, or can cover a wide variety of economic sectors, and this is what we see depicted here. The economic sector that is most widely covered by ETSs is industry, followed by the power sector and the mining and extractive sector. In recent years, in the last decade, there has been an increasing interest in covering fossil fuel combustion from sectors such as transport, maritime, and fuel use in agriculture and or forestry. Also interesting to mention that only the New Zealand ETS covers the forestry sector. In the next slide, we see the intensity base versus the absolute caps. So ETSs tend to come in two different flavors, depending on whether they put an absolute cap on emissions or a predefined and absolute cap on emissions, or a cap that depends on the generation and or the output by regulated entities. So a limit on emissions per unit of output and per unit of production. The distinction of the jurisdictions that use one of these flavors or the other is depicted here, in which the jurisdictions painted in dark blue are those that apply a hard cap on emissions, an absolute cap on emissions, and the ones in lighter blue are the ones that use an intensity-based limit. We also see a pie chart here that depicts the share of emissions that are covered by one or the other systems. And again, we see that the vast majority of emissions covered by an ETS is covered by an intensity-based system. And again, this is due to, in no small part, the impact of the China national ETS, of course, also India, and of course other systems that apply this approach. The next slide shows the potential use of carbon credits into ETSs. This is another key design signature of ETSs. Depending on the system design and the goals that the ETS is seeking to achieve, allowing offsets as an alternative compliance mechanism could expand the carbon price to non-regulated sectors, increase financial flows for these sectors to achieve abatement, and increase flexibility in compliance for regulated entities. The jurisdictions that are depicted in yellow in this infographic are those that do not accept the use of carbon credits, non-compliance carbon credits, as part of their compliance obligations. Those that are depicted in light blue are those that accept credits with some quantitative limits, usually a share of the compliance obligation of the regulated entities. And those in blue are those that do not impose any quantitative limits on the use of credits. Also, we can see that there's three jurisdictions with red striped lines. Those are the systems that accept international credits for compliance. All the other systems only accept domestic credits for compliance. The next slide shows us the offset credit demand potential for all the systems that accept carbon credits for compliance. The bars that we see in dark blue are the coverage of the ETS, either the cap or the emissions coverage, the total emissions coverage. Whether the light bar in blue, the light blue bar, sorry, depicts the total demand potential for carbon credits. Again, this usually comes from as a result, as a share of the compliance obligation. One important thing to mention here is that this infographic is not depicting actual offset use. It is only depicting the theoretical maximum use of credits for each of the systems that are depicted. The small box on the upper right of the slide also shows the total for all of the systems that accept credits, which account for around 11 gigatons of CO2 equivalent emissions, versus the maximum limit, theoretical limit on credit use, which is around 1.4 gigaton of CO2 emissions. In the next slide, we see the yearly ETS revenues. Over time, every year, ETS usually raise revenues by the sale of allowances or compliance credits or payments to funds or equivalent compliance mechanisms. As Alex was mentioning, in 2025, the systems in force, the ETSs in force, raised a record amount of revenues, almost 80 billion US dollars, and notably since 2007, over 454 billion US dollars have been accrued, raised by ETSs in force. In the next slide, we see the use of ETS revenues. Different, depending on the institutional or regulatory restrictions, different ETSs allow for the use of these revenues into different goals, and this is what we see depicted here. Some jurisdictions channel revenues straight into their general budget, while others earmark them for specific purposes, such as climate mitigation or direct support for individuals, households, and businesses. With that, we thank you very much for your attention. We would like again to invite you to see the notes on methods and sources that contain explanations and clarifications on the data sources and assumptions where applicable. We also look forward to the discussions and are happy to answer any questions. And feel free to contact us as info@icapcarbonaction.com for any additional questions that you may have.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Victor. So yeah, thanks for walking through that is with us. So we're now going to move on to our panel discussion. This is really the heart of today's session. So I'll just briefly explain how we'd like to run this. What I will do is I will invite each of our panelists to respond to the same two questions. So firstly, is there anything from what you've just heard in the presentation of the report that resonates with you, something that catches your attention or chimes with your own experience or reflects developments that you're seeing in your regional or global perspective? Then secondly, we then ask you to elaborate, what do you think are the three most important upcoming developments in your own jurisdiction that you'd like to flag for this audience? So we'll go through each panelist in turn. I'm just going to check in to see if Dirk Weinreich has managed to join us here. Are you there, Dirk? Okay, not yet. Then yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. That's great. Um,
Excellent.
okay, if you could if you could somehow turn up your volume a little bit or speak a little louder, that would be great. You're quite quiet.
Okay, sorry for that. And hello to everybody. First
Oh,
of all,
fantastic.
I want to very warmly welcome you to this important webinar on the launch of our most recent ICAP status report. Um, A big thanks to the ICAP Secretariat for preparing this year's status report and for organizing, of course, today's and yesterday's webinar. We always split this between America and Asia. The report is, of course, as always, a very important resource. Year after year, it provides the most comprehensive global overview of where emission trading stands. And yeah, that is also no exception this time. Um, I see that almost 100 people are watching and following this webinar today. Welcome to you all. And so it reflects how central emissions trading has become to climate policy across our regions and beyond. Um, if I take a short look on what we've heard and on what I've seen from the report, you could say, first of all, despite mounting political headwinds, we have a critical geopolitical and economic situation in most parts of the world. The overarching message is clear. The ETS momentum has not slowed. So we feel that there's steady course in turbulent waters um, if it comes to ETS emissions trading worldwide. Emission trading also has moved from a niche to mainstream. It's now a central tool in 14 of the G20 20 nations. That's also, I think, an important success. Europe and Asia, the focus of today's webinar, are central to current ETS momentum. The EU, I'll come to this a bit later, will advance some reforms. And in Asia, we see mostly new systems emerging in Japan, India, and Vietnam. And some Asian schemes also move from intensity-based approaches towards absolute caps, which we welcome, of course, very much. And also, especially to name that this was signaled strongly by China's planned transition. So if we look ahead, as I said, the political acceptance is becoming crucial, as of course, the more we move towards net zero, it is also that our emissions trading systems, maybe also covering transport and households, as planned in Europe, they come closer to the citizen. And they will also have put heavy demand on the transformation of industry. So it is very clear that we need wise measures in the ETS, but also around ETS. And we need in all to say an intelligent design. And therefore we feel that ICAP can still offer a key platform for this dialogue. But I also want to mention that ETS revenues are rising, and this provide governments with meaningful resources to fund the transition and to support affected communities, to support complementary measures. If I shortly move to Germany, you will later hear from Ruben Vermeeren how this is all done in Europe as a whole, but of course, as we are part of the EU-wide system, allow me a few words also on the EU-wide system. We have a very ambitious reform behind us, but we are also now before a next very important reform, and this is given the political situation that I described. It will be important to balance the ambition that still is necessary in all ETS sectors to reach our net zero goals, but also with competitiveness demands and with the possibility, especially for our industries, to get along with this transition. And this will be a big part of the reform. There are many proposals discussed at the moment. The Commission will come forward with an important proposal on the so-called review of ETS 1, 2, and also the CBAM. So this will be also an important discussion, and Ruben will have more for you on that, I guess. For Germany, it only remains me to say that there were some discussions in the past, in the beginning of the year, that Germany would also join those who are skeptical about the ETS. This is not the case, and our Chancellor recently made that quite clear, and we also will publish a paper on this. We are convinced, the whole German government is convinced, that the emissions trading is still one, if not the key instrument for reaching our transition to climate neutrality. The only thing is, as I said, that we, of course, will have to, as an export-oriented and a highly industrialized country, we will have to make sure that also our industry can cope with with the ambition, and that our industry is able to follow the big transition that the ETS cap is demanding. So it will be about balancing a bit the supply and demand, but in general, we feel that an ambitious emissions trading system is key. Coming to some German specificities, you may know that we still have a national emissions trading system, fuel-based emissions trading system, as it comes to transport and households, as long as there is no ETS2 in no EU-wide system. This is now planned to come into operation in 2028. Sorry. So that means we are preparing, we just passed legislation to the transition of our national system to the EU-wide ETS2. It will be a major step to signal, it is a major step that we are already signaling the phase out of the national system. And yeah, that will be an important step. You know that the coming into operation of ETS2 was planned once in 2027. Now it was postponed by the EU in 2028. It gives everybody more time to prepare in this sensitive field. That means our national system will still continue to price fuel emissions for another year. Our carbon price in 2025 reached 55 euros per ton. That was the highest level to date under the fixed price regimes, and it generated around 16 billion revenues, by the way, for Climate and Transition Fund. We use all the revenues for climate and transition purposes. In 2026, we for the first time, will go from fixed pricing to auctioning. And so that means the allowances under our national system will be sold on the EEX platform with a price corridor of 55 to 65 per ton. If the cap is exceeded and additional sums are needed, then the price will even be 68 euros. Yeah, maybe I leave it with that. So the key questions will be the reform of the ETS1 in the EU and the transition to the ETS2 covering households and transport and small industries in the EU. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dirk. Thanks for making time this morning. We know you have another commitment, so yeah, we really appreciate that you could attend and open our discussion. Really, yeah, interesting insights at an interesting time in Germany, in Europe, and in the world of ETS. Thanks. I'd now like to move across to Asia. I'm going to ask Subham to join us here. So, are you there, Subham?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great, fantastic. So you're joining us as an ICAP Humboldt Research Fellow from India. India's had one of the most significant new ETS launches this year. I'd pose the same two questions to you. First of all, first, is there anything from what you've just heard in the presentation of the report that resonates you, catches your attention, or chimes with your own experience? And secondly, what do you think are the three most important upcoming developments in India that you'd like to flag for this audience?
Great. So thank you, Alex, and thank you for having me in this discussion as well. And firstly, a very big congratulations to the ICAP team for this stellar report. I think all of us here look forward to this report every year, and this year was no different. Going through the report and through the presentation as well, I think a few things caught my attention. Firstly was this number of 73%, right? So 73% of the global ETS covered emissions are actually under intensity-based caps. But even if you look at it in terms of systems count, it is closer to 50%. So it's clear that intensity-based systems are becoming very popular, especially with developing nations, because it provides them the flexibility to not adversely impact output growth. And another aspect which I think is instrumental here is acceptance of the system, as Dirk was also mentioning that sometimes these are politically contentious things, and then intensity-based systems allows for markets to bring carbon markets in the first place and make it more acceptable. And on the topic of acceptance itself, I think it was hinted a couple of times in the presentation that the systems of California and Washington have been renaming the systems from cap and trade to cap and invest. And I think this is a huge development because it's not only a name change per se. It basically signals that the government looks at the ETS revenues as some sort of a fiscal instrument, which makes it very important for how the system is headed towards. But if you look at the total ETS revenues generated, I think 80% of it comes from the European Union and the Germany ETS combined. So most of the other ETSs are still kind of starting to bring out, phasing out free allocations and starting to bring auctions. So I think this would be an interesting thing to look forward in the coming years as well. And mostly it's China here, and China is moving from intensity-based caps to an absolute cap with auctioning. So I think that would be a textbook example for all other intensity-based systems, trying to make that thing as well. I think another aspect which I think Victor mentioned was the use of offsets, and it kind of looks interesting that a lot of countries are starting to build their own domestic markets, domestic offset markets before looking outward. But now the question I don't think is whether international offsets will be used. Now it seems to be more of a question of when and under what governance conditions would they be used. So I think overall it was a excellent report with the core the insight that ETS is slowly becoming a core policy tool and not a niche tool, as Alex had mentioned. So yeah, I think that is mostly what I thought about the report itself. But if I have to talk about the Indian carbon market, Again, I would like to preface this by saying that these are my understanding of the market, and it may differ from the government of India, but this is from my understanding of what the market looks like. So India is coming up with this scheme not from a blank slate. We had more than a decade of experience with the Perform Achieve Trade scheme, which was an energy efficiency program, and it led to cumulative emission avoidance of more than 100 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that was a huge environmental performance that we saw. But what the PAT scheme also taught us is that environmental performance and market performance are two different things. So even if we had a good performance in the environmental scene, the market performance kind of faltered because of certain issues that the regulators identified. It was mostly with the target setting and some other market-based mechanisms. And the current scheme, or the carbon credit trading scheme that we have, the carbon market, is built from the lessons that we learned from the PAT scheme. So CCTS is a intensity-based baseline and credit market. And to not complicate it, in a simple way to think about it is that it is a market which has 100% output-based allocation. And all of the targets under the intensity caps are notified at the subsector level and at the plant level. So even within one particular company, there could be multiple targets to different plants. And all of this is done using an audited baseline data. And we cover scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And if you look at all of the technicalities, it is a very comprehensive and ambitious coverage across sectors. As we speak, we are in the first compliance cycle, and we have notified targets for 7 industrial sectors. So our market only covers industries in the first cycle, and as it was also shown in the status report. But it covers around 490 plants, and this is adding up to around 480 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent of coverage. In terms of India's emissions, it's close to 12 to 14%. And as highlighted, when iron and steel targets, which is currently not yet notified, but the moment they come in, our coverage will be closer to 20%. And that puts India in a respectable place, even in the infographic that we had shown about how much of coverage is there. So with 20% coverage, and the important thing here is that it's in the first cycle. It's our first cycle, and will be close to covering 20% of our emissions, which surely shows that there is some ambition in the operation here. Alongside the compliance market, we will have an offset market, and we are like most other countries, we're starting to build our domestic offset first, and for that we have made our own registry and a carbon market portal, which was recently launched. But we are also engaging with Article 6 credits. We recently signed a joint crediting mechanism with Japan, and we kind of authorized some of the mitigation outcomes, which are at the upper end of the marginal abatement cost curves. But it did not only make sense financially, but I think also because of the core benefits that it brings in terms of technology transfer and all of those other things. But currently, the offset market credit from the domestic market are not fungible in the compliance market. And probably when we look at the first cycle and see how the the marginal abatement cost curves, they behave and how does the market behave, we might look at having some sort of a quantitative limit intake of the offset market as well. And I think finally, I'd like to say that the CCTS, or the carbon credit trading scheme, again, sits between a host of other climate companion policies as well. So we have fuel standards, we have renewable consumption obligations. So we are actively also studying the the waterbed effect that could be there because of multiple policies in the policy mix. So that is something that we're looking out in the first cycle also. And another aspect that we're looking out for is the introduction of a market stability mechanism. So how would an intensity-based market stability mechanism look like is something that is being discussed in India with one of the recommendations in a report that I had authored last year. But this is still a lively debate, and we're kind of looking at it in the second cycle of how to introduce some sort of a mechanism. Currently, we have a price floor and a price ceiling. But yeah, India is just starting out, and I think it's clear that we are placing the CCTS, as you rightly said, as a core pillar of our climate policy, and not as a appendage to any other environmental policy. So, thanks.
Thank you, Subham. Thank you for those insights. Yeah, really, really interesting. And there's certainly some questions that I would have there. I would just like to remind the audience so that we also have the question and answer function here. So please, if you have any broader questions, any comments you'd like to hear from the speakers, please write them in there. I'd now like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Han Winya from from the Policy Research Center for Environment and Economy in China. Are you there? Are you with us, Dr. Han?
Okay, thank you, Alexander.
Thank you. So great. I'll just reiterate the questions that I'm putting now to each of our panelists. First of all, thank you very much for joining us. Is there anything that you just heard from the presentation, from the report, that catches your attention, maybe reflects the developments that you're seeing in your region, or from your perspective resonates with you? Would be a start. And then I'd ask you to move to what you think are, say, the 3 most important upcoming developments in China that you'd like to flag for this audience. Thanks. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thanks to the ICAP for the invitation. The report just presented by Alex and Victor gives a really thorough overview of the ETS system around the world, laying out the design elements of each one in a standardized way. It also analyzed the current challenges and trends, offering a full set of practical lessons for those who are willing to improve their ETS, like China, or planning to launch the ETS. So regarding the report, I would like to offer a different view on the CBAM. It has been mentioned many times. First, the report points out that the CBAM has entered the compliance phase, marking a new era of carbon pricing for international trade. And as alternatives to free allocation begin to surface, the most groundbreaking approach is the EU's CBAM. So this is mentioned in the report. But from my view, I think if CBAM uses all the money it collects to help producing countries cut their emissions, or if it shifts the carbon reduction responsibility from those emissions from the producing countries to the EU member states, and also fix unreasonable designs like the default values in its rule, then it might deserve that kind of praise. So otherwise, CBAM is basically just a trade protection measures dressed up as a climate action. So this is the first. And second, the report points out that for many countries, the EU's CBAM has also served as a catalyst for broader carbon pricing ambitions. I think the word catalyst is also a bit of overpraised. In fact, the setting of CBAM default values is unreasonable, and the EU's plan to establish a temporary decarbonization fund is really unfair. So this is my different view for your consideration. And moving to China's carbon market, the ICAP report just now really already has quite a lot of description covering the design progress and reform directions for both the national market and the local pilots, including the absolute caps, auctions, sector expansion, NDC commissions, and so on. So many of which have been mentioned by Alex. So let me add some more points. First, regarding the functional positioning of the carbon market, we believe that it plays a decisive role in the allocation of carbon emission allowance. Compared to the traditional approach that relies on administrative orders, technical standards, and project approvals, the carbon market has established a more flexible and effective pathway. And the ecological and environmental code has also provided a strong legal foundation for emission trading. Looking at the power sector, green development has achieved notable results. Over the past 5 years, China's installed capacity of new renewable power generation has historically surpassed that of coal-fired power, and nearly 4 out of every 10 kilowatt hours of electricity consumed in our society comes from green electricity. And second, let me add 2 points. On one hand, after years of continuous efforts, the national carbon market has developed a set of long-term mechanisms for data quality management. Although the cost is really high, we believe that accurate and reliable emission data is critical and worth the effort. So here are some details. First, verification is very strict. China has established a multi-level government and a multi-party verification system. And the second, the penalties are the toughest. Fines can go up to 10 times of the illegal gains. Third, reporting frequency is the highest. Some data must be reported on a monthly basis. And on the other hand, the second edition of the National Greenhouse Gas Emission Factor database has been greatly expanded compared to the first one. The total number of factors has increased to 576. Adding direct emission factors for energy activities, industrial process, agriculture, and the indirect emission factor for electricity consumption. And the expanded and updated emission factor help better support the data quality management. And third, regarding the next step, the fifth five-year plan for economic and social development has clearly stated the consideration to expand the coverage of the national carbon emission trading market and diversify trading products and tools. And the 2026 work priorities of the Ministry of Ecology and Environment include the revision of the carbon emission trading management measures, introducing a hybrid allocation approach, combining free and paid allowance, and developing cross-border carbon trading management measures, etc. And we have supported the Ministry of Ecology and Environment in releasing the National Carbon Market Development Report for the past 2 years. And this year, the report is currently being drafted and will be released in September. And regarding the 3 directions in the future, I look forward to better breakthroughs. First is how the carbon market can better play its role in low-cost emission reduction, and which may enhance the confidence for each party. And second, how carbon finance can serve as an effective supporting tool. We wish it may not increase the cost of decarbonization. And third, how accounting standards and emission factors among different carbon markets can be mutually recognized. So we wish to reduce the negative impact of unilateral measures such as CBAM. So I will stop here. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Dr. Han. Thank you very much for your input. Thank you also for your, I would say, clear and well-justified critiques of that you put on the table here. I'm really glad to hear that this is a forum in which these critiques can be discussed. So thank you for that. also, I think what was clear from your updates there is that the ambition and the progress there in China, it's real and serious, and it's happening not just at the political but at the technical level. And this is, yeah, I mean, this is something that the world really needs to take notice of. I also, in one of your last comments there, heard about. I think this is something that's reflected from the report as well. The need for for collaboration to basically bring coherence and to avoid this kind of fragmentation that that is the possibility in regional and global carbon markets. So thank you very much for your input. We'd be very happy to come back and answer ask some questions and join the discussion. For now, I'd like to move on. I would very much like to invite Han Dang, and I would also like to offer my apologies for the introduction before. Sorry, that was just wrong. Han Dang is the co-founder and CEO from Energy Environment JSC of Vietnam, the VNEEC. I'd very much like to invite you to take the floor now, Han, and reflect on these two questions as well. First of all, if there's something that struck you from the report or broader global ETS developments, and then to move on to what you see as some of the key developments in Vietnam, especially considering that Vietnam's pilot ETS is now entering into force.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of the panel, and congratulations for the launching of the ETS update report. That's also a very important report that we usually rely on, and to quote the data and also the information to present to our different stakeholders in Vietnam. So in short, our VNEX is the advisory, currently is advisory company to the government in setting up and also for the operation of the ETS in Vietnam. Yesterday, we just finished the one workshop to train the installation on the use of the national registry system, for example. And then on Monday, we just finished one workshop together in Ministry of Finance to prepare the readiness of different stakeholders for the trading on the carbon trading platform. That means for the trading platform for the ETS in the future. So yeah, to answer the first question on the impression of the reports, of course, we are happy to see that the trend of the expanding the ETS worldwide, regardless of the current geopolitical conflicts, and then also for the shift to the structural change. This is very encouraging for the newcomer like Vietnam. So because we believe that we are on the right track, and then we continue like also the commitment and also the effort that we are working on, because this is not like the thing happen over the day, but this is a long process of preparation of Vietnam with different stakeholders. And also we have to emphasize on the political commitment of the government. Yeah. So, and then we also like see that the transparency is the key for the successful operation of an ETS. So I think this is also very important for Vietnam. And then but actually, I have a concern if we see the volume or the size of the trading worldwide, especially for the two major ETS in Asia, like in China and Korea. So you see that the volume is not really big. And then this is something we have to convey to the government of Vietnam, because they expect that once the ETS is in operation, then it's kind of booming in the transaction, and then also in the volume of the trades, and then also in the size of the market. So this is something very interesting that I see that we can capture and then can also share with the government. And I also see that's one of the missing things we haven't mentioned here. This is the co-benefits of the ETS that can contribute to different aspects of the social and economic. So I hope that in the future report we can mention about that, because this is also kind of very important to convince or to engage people and also different stakeholders to support for the ETS implementation. And then I also want to see maybe deeper bit on the drive the driver factor of the ETS implementation of the other country, because people usually ask me whether the CBAM also contribute, like is also the factor that contribute to the decision of the government of Vietnam to moving forward with the carbon pricing, especially on the ETS. So I also want to see like the lesson from other countries, what is the main driving force for like implement of the ETS. So this is sort of impressions. And then for the update on Vietnam, I think first we you may heard that the Vietnam we complete the allocation very recently in last month only, and then we allocate to allowance to 110 installations in not in steel in general, but only in crude steel, in clinker production. Not on cement enterprises, but only in clinker and also in the thermal power plant. So in total is 110, with a size that about 268 million of the allowance allocated. But then if you see the range, it's quite interesting to see that some the biggest one receive about 15 million allowance, while the smallest is just some hundred. So we also concerned for the management and then for the implication on the market operation later. So I think for Vietnam overall, we can say that the readiness of the political readiness is stronger than the technical readiness. So we see that a lot of technical issues still are coming, and we have to address until that they expect to launch the ETS in Q2. Maybe in the end of May or early June or somehow in between. Yeah, so this is the plan that we got from the government yesterday, that they will launch the ETS in Q2 only. So, and then the allocation, now they allocated for 2 years, 2025 and 2026. And they allow for 30% of the allowance can be offset by credits, but no methodology for credit are available yet. So it's demand is mean that the demand for credit may be high, but we have no supply in the coming time. At least in I think until the end of this year, maybe you don't have credit to supply for the ETS. And we see that the challenge or the key question that burning to us at the consultant, and also we share with the government at the moment, is the volume or the quality of the transaction. Because in our assessment, this is a kind of a bit over allocation. And then we have no, and also we have quite, let's say 30% of offset is quite, let's say, generous rate of the government at the moment. Those we don't have the carbon credit available yet, but still it will also impact on the trading and later. And we see that the readiness of the installation that they receive the allowance is quite low at the moment, like from our training and workshops and different consultation routes. And so we quite concerned about the quality of the data. Like Dr. Han said that with the Chinese experience, this is the most important thing, but this is still in the learning process of Vietnam for the quality of data. This is very crucial in the coming time, and also for the compliance later. And we also see the market oversight is not ready yet. And this is also something that the government should improve soon. So otherwise, so come back to the transparency of the market, and also for the sake of the transaction and the things, so we quite concerned about that. So in our point of view, we recommend to the government that they don't put the high, very expectation for the size of the transaction in this phase, but it's rather the learning process and to get people to engage and also to be ready for the pilot phase only, but then to learn for the full operation in 2029 only. So this is our recommendation to the government and also some of the conclusion I would like to share with you. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your input. Really interesting and also really exciting that the stage that you're at there in Vietnam is a very exciting stage. And thank you also for some of your comments about what you would like to see emphasized in future reports. I think this is very interesting. We'll take these on board, especially related to such things as co-benefits and other ways in which political and public acceptance can be enhanced, as we know this is an important topic, and this is something we haven't touched yet with this status report. So I'd be happy to carry this forward into the next round. Thank you very much. I'd just like to remind everybody that the Q&A function is now live. Please just type your questions in there, and we'll get to them shortly. I'd now like to invite Ruben Vermeeren from DG Klima in the European Commission to... are you there, Ruben?
Yes, I'm here. I'm turning on my camera.
Okay, fantastic.
Sorry for having arrived late.
Great, thank you. I know people are very busy, and it's great that you could join us. I'd put these two questions to you as well. If you could briefly give an impression of the report, or more broadly the state of ETS in the world at the moment from your perspective, and then say three of the what you think are some of the important ongoing updates or from your jurisdiction being Europe. Thanks. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And I would like to start indeed by thanking you and thanking the whole team at ICAP for developing this report once again. I haven't looked at the full report yet, but the presentation looks very good and always very shiny. As the previous speaker said, it's a great resource and we use it really a lot. It gives you a very good big picture to take stock. And if you do this exercise for a few years in a row, then you also start seeing interesting trends. And I think indeed the most exciting things are happening in Asia in the area of carbon pricing. Japan, Vietnam, India having now compliance systems. That's a huge step forward. And of course, it will be interesting to see in the coming years what will happen with these systems. We see from the Chinese presentation that there's really a lot of progress happening on the ground. And it will be exciting to see what happens for the other Asian countries going ahead. 80% you said of ETS emissions are covered are in Asia of ETS covered emissions. I think that's a very impressive percentage. But of course, it also raises the question on what happens, what is behind these figures. You may have an ETS, but then the question is, how does it work and what happens on the ground? There's, you said, a lot of intensity-based systems being developed, some with an objective to go to an absolute cap. How well are these systems doing? What are the real incentives that they give to the companies? If they indeed all accept offsets to a certain extent with quantitative limits, how well are these offset programs working? What is the type of offsets? What is the quality of the offsets? Revenues, I was saying Asia is exciting, but we don't see much revenues from Asia. And of course, that has to do with the fact that there's limited auctioning. How well do systems work that don't have auctioning? What are the real prices that our companies are paying? And I think in the EU, what we are seeing with the CBAM, and of course, from the European perspective, CBAM is very important in the sense that it enables the phase out of free allocation. So it really increases the carbon price for European companies. I think it's important for non-European countries to understand that our companies are facing a huge carbon price going forward. What matters for them is the price that they actually pay. That is the carbon price signal, and that is what impacts their real-life investment decisions. Do we continue emitting and paying a high carbon price with some protection at the border, or do we really invest now and make use of support mechanisms to leave business as usual production behind and go for an innovative decarbonization technology? That I think is the big question for us at the moment, as we start to leave behind the low-hanging fruit of the power sector, where it's relatively easy. There is a business case for renewables. We see coal being phased out, gas being reduced, but on the other hand, a lot of renewables coming in. In the industrial sectors, it's a lot harder, and that is now the challenge that we have in front of us. Of course, these are questions that are nothing for the next iteration of the status report. That is a factual report, but I think the good thing of the report is that it invites to think about these type of questions. To give you a short update on the EU ETS. So we published just 5 days ago the 2025 emission reduction figures. They show that emissions reduced by 1.3% in 2025 compared to 2024. So that confirms the declining trend, and that is good news. On the other hand, it also shows that emissions have not reduced as quickly as our cap on emissions reduces. Our cap reduces now by 4.4%, and emission reductions are 1.3%. Zooming out, overall, since the start of the ETS, the EU ETS 20 years ago, the sectors have reduced their emissions by more than 50%. We need to go to minus 62%. That is our cap for 2030. So we still have some way to go in the remaining years of this decade. But we are still confident that we are on track. Looking more closely at the individual sectors, we have, of course, the electricity sector, which is still the key sector. I said it already. Improvements have not been as impressive as they have been in previous years. There's only a small reduction of emissions with 0.4%, but there was an increase in electricity consumption of 2.7%. So we use more electricity and emitted less. That's good. But it was not a very windy year and not a very wet year in Europe. So our wind resources and also our hydro has not had as much output as it had in previous years. It was a very sunny year, and so solar output went up by almost 25%. We see 6% less coal and 11% more gas-fired generation. On the other side of the spectrum, we have industry, most importantly. So the big steel, cement, chemical plants. There we have to do a more granular sectoral analysis to see what is happening. Together, they reduce their emissions by 2.5%. But of course, the important question here is how much of that is decarbonization and how much of that is a reduction of output. For example, in the construction sector, cement, there's clearly a reduction of output. Politically, I think 2025 was a turbulent year, a challenging year for us as a result of global trends, trade, politics, economics. For us, again, the focus has been a lot on industrial decarbonization. We have been having very intense discussions with the most important ETS sectors, the chemicals, the fertilizers, the steel, the glass, ceramics. All of them understand that they have to decarbonize. They also say having just an ETS price signal is not enough for us to invest in clean technologies. We need more. We need not only a good CBAM that protects at the border and that creates a level playing field with competitors. We also need enabling conditions. We need infrastructure for CO2. We need infrastructure maybe for hydrogen. We need lots of electricity grids. We need lots of renewables. We don't want to pay more than 50 euro per megawatt hour for our electricity. That's a very challenging one in particular. And so these are the discussions we've been having with these sectors. In parallel, there has been an important energy price debate in Europe. Our electricity prices are higher than in other parts of the world. Maybe not higher than Japan. I think we're more or less there, but much higher than, for example, in China and the United States. And this is, of course, something that companies want us to do something about. And there's not that much you can do. One of the things you can do is address the ETS, stop the ETS. It's of course not something that we want to do. So we've spent a lot of time trying to explain also to politicians in the member states why we need the ETS, why we need the long-term signal, why we need the long-term strategy. And I think also many companies have come out and supported the ETS in this, the EU ETS in this debate. We've really received hundreds of letters from companies and associations, member states, organizations to keep the ETS and to keep it strong and clear and predictable. We saw the ETS price increase at the end of last year from around 65 euros to around 90 euros, which is high, of course, but also in a context of an ETS review coming up, in the context of the ETS benchmarks for free allocation being revised. That's something that we are still not done with. And in the context of this energy price debate, all of these factors together, they created this this perfect storm, let's say, that then also caused us to accept some measures that maybe we would have preferred not to have. For example, the ETS2 for buildings and road transport, which will be a separate system, a separate ETS from our current ETS, has been postponed with 1 year until 2028. Another thing we had to do just 2 weeks ago was amend our market stability reserve to stop the invalidation of allowances. This is a legislative proposal that we have put on the table, and that is now for the member states and the European Parliament to assess. Finally, I think to say a few words on the ETS review. In 2025, the European Council, so the heads of state and government, decided on a new climate target for the year 2040, and it is minus 90% compared to 1990 emissions. So this minus 90% now gives us a very clear point on the horizon for the year 2040 for us to calculate what the contribution of the ETS sectors should be to this 90% target. And that is what informs our review that is coming in July. How can we go to 90%? Do we also need to go to 90%, a bit less, a bit more? And how do international credits play a role? Because the European Council has decided that up to 5% of that 90% can be met by international credits. And so perhaps domestically, there will be a lower target applicable, could be 85 or 86 or 87. And on that basis, we can again calculate what the ETS needs to do and what the cap trajectory will be. It's already clear that the cap trajectory will not need to be 4.4% per year reductions as we have it now. That would bring us to 0 in 2039, and that's not where we have to be. We can be a bit less ambitious and still have the appropriate contribution to the overall target. But of course, minus 90 is extremely ambitious. It requires really a transformation of our economy. And I think slowly but certainly people are starting to realize that virtually all cement plants will have to do CCS. Virtually all steel plants will have to be either electric arc or DRI and hydrogen. And this is something that is that is difficult, and that also requires, I think, extra support, not just the ETS, not just the high level target, but really on the ground support for these sectors. And then there are those that are extremely hard to abate. We haven't talked yet about aviation or process emissions, but of course we need to cater for their needs too, acknowledging that people will still fly in 2040, people will still use plastics in 2040. So how can we support them? Can negative emissions play a role? For example, that is certainly something that will be an important element of our review, as will carbon leakage protection, CBAM, free allocation. and also the market stability reserve. I think in the international arena, we are spending a lot of time on linking it back up with the United Kingdom. They left the EU ETS and now they want to come back. And so we are negotiating with them a link. We are already linked with Switzerland. And of course, I wanted to mention also, yes, with China, sometimes there are disagreements on the CBAM and on the default values. And I was just logging in when I heard these points, and they are fair criticisms, I think, and we should discuss them. But I think also in parallel, because CBAM is with the colleagues of the taxation department, in parallel, I think we have very, very good and very close cooperation with the Chinese colleagues on the China ETS, especially. And I think we are quite proud of the progress that is being made. So with that, maybe I'll stop, and thank you very, very much.
Thanks a lot, Ruben. Thanks for your candid reflections. It is difficult times, but there is real progress being made. So we're now actually just reached the end of the allocated time. I would like to stay for another 5 minutes just to pose at least one question to the panelists. I hope that people can stay, but of course I understand if you need to drop off now. There's been a few different questions come up in the chat, but there's one I'd like to bring a sort of an overarching question. So this is about what role do you think that international cooperation should or can play in strengthening carbon pricing across jurisdictions? So what do you think are the main benefits from regional or international coherence? And on the view of the panelists, how can this be advanced? How can we bring more coherence, more cooperation, more collaboration into this landscape, which really is a kind of a bottom-up, domestic first kind of process we're seeing here? We say we need more international collaboration and coherence. What are the benefits? How can we best get there? I'll just open, I think, to any panelists that would like to make a short comment on this, but I would like to go to any panelist which has a perspective on this. So is there anybody who has something on their mind they'd like to jump in here? Otherwise, I'll just go back directly to Ruben, who had the floor already. Thanks. Back to you, Ruben.
Yes, happy to say a few words. I think, as the Vietnamese colleague Ham Dang said, the CBAM, I think, has triggered a lot of interest globally in carbon pricing. And we will, by the way, very soon come also with an implementing act that shows our requirements and our conditions for recognizing a third country carbon price. Should the scheme look like, and under what conditions can we give carbon prices paid in those countries a discount on the CBAM levy? This is coming. But coming back to the question, here we have a lot of contact now with third countries, and we have set up a special task force. I'm not working there, but there's a special task force led by my colleague Sebastian, who is reaching out and having contacts with lots of countries, including ones on the call. And I think I would always say linking is the ultimate and the ultimate form of cooperation, but there's so much more that you can do, and that is equally important up to the moment of linking. And here, of course, from the sharing of practices, information exchange, also ICAP's role of explaining certain core design elements of ETSs, what works well, what works less, where do you need to take care of. I think that is extremely important. Market integration, I think, is mostly useful for smaller countries or for countries because an ETS is not an easy system. If you can link up with a bigger one and make use of the infrastructure that is there, I think that's useful. But there are also other forms of integration that are less invasive. The Open Coalition, for example, that Brazil and China are co-chairing with us. So yeah, maybe I'll keep it at that.
Thanks a lot for those reflections. I would put this in back to the other panelists. Also considering international crediting mechanisms under Article 6 are potentially a way to build this coherence. Are there any further reflections from the panelists?
Yeah.
Thanks, Subham.
Yeah. So thank you, Alex. And I think the question here by Sophia is what also I was reading and I have responded to over the chat. But I think for just on the second part of the question, which is the methodologies, I think a lot of the methodologies that domestic ones are also being built, they're like the one in India, we're calling it the Bharat methodologies. But these are Paris compliant, and we explicitly acknowledge that we'll be following all of the Paris principles. So I think there is some sort of an alignment there. And but oftentimes what becomes difficult is the methodology itself and the formulas behind it. So I think a global cooperation in kind of formalizing some of these methodologies is what is required. But what I wanted to answer to Sophia as well is that what most markets are doing with the domestic method is to build the integrity necessary for the time when this interface has to come with Article 6 credits. So this is a deliberate sequencing approach, but while it fractures the market in the short run and it may look like it, the larger aim is to eventually have an interface with the larger Article 6 market. So.
Great, thanks a lot. I'm just going to ask if there are any further reflections. Otherwise, I'll wrap up here because we are a bit over time. Well, let's leave it there then. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thanks for really rich and varied inputs here. There's a lot that we could carry on and unpack here. I feel like we've scratched the surface here a little bit, but we've also heard some really great input. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks everybody for attending. Do go and download the report and take a look into the details there. And please also feel free to get in contact with us at ICAP. Thanks once again to everybody. This has been a really rich and really interesting webinar. We'll sign off now. Thank you very much.